Hey, stop! That's my property! I screamed at the top of my lungs as the roar of engines drowned me out. Dust filled the air, stinging my eyes and coating my throat as two yellow bulldozers clawed into the pines that had shaded my deck for years. A man in a hard hat barely glanced at me, his hand lazily resting on the throttle. "Talk to the HOA, lady. We got orders," he shouted over the grinding metal. For a moment, I couldn't even process what I was seeing. It was a warm Friday morning, the kind where sunlight danced on the lake and everything smelled like pine needles and coffee. I'd retired early from nursing to buy this little corner of peace. 5 quiet acres by Pine Ridge Lake, a place where my soul could finally breathe after 20 years in trauma wards. But now my sanctuary was shaking under the weight of steel treads and men who acted like they owned it. I ran closer, waving my deed papers like a lunatic, yelling for them to stop. One of the workers turned down his radio and said, almost kindly, "Ma'am, it's HOA land. You're outside the new boundary." I blinked at him, confused. "What boundary?" He just shrugged and kept working. The sound of trees splitting echoed through the woods like gunfire. I rushed back to my porch and dialed the HOA office. When Rick Harmon answered, his voice was smooth as butter, the kind of tone that smiles while it lies. "Now, Laura, calm down," he said. "You must have missed the notice. The association approved an expansion project last quarter. Vacation cabins, lakeview rentals, good for property value." I could practically hear his smirk through the phone. "On my land?" I snapped. "Rick, that's private property." He chuckled, low and patronizing. "If you're so sure, maybe check your records. Our survey says otherwise. Nothing personal, just progress." Then he hung up, just like that. My heart pounded as I stumbled out to the tree line, trying to find the metal markers that had always outlined my property. I knew where everyone used to be. My dad had helped me mark them when I first bought the place. But now, they were gone. Every single one. In their place stood thin orange flags fluttering in the dirt, stretching in a neat, mechanical line down toward the lake. I followed them, disbelief twisting into fury. My boots crunched over broken branches and splintered roots. They'd already scraped half an acre bare, the smell of diesel and sap mixing thick in the air. It felt like an invasion, not just of land, but of everything I'd built my peace on. By noon, the bulldozers had chewed through what used to be my garden. The men laughed as they worked, like this was routine, like stealing a woman's backyard was just another Friday job. I wanted to scream until they stopped, but they wouldn't. They had orders. That night, I couldn't eat. I couldn't even sit still. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, staring into the dim, clearing where my trees used to be. The lake reflected orange from the construction lights still left on. My phone buzzed with messages from neighbors, none supportive. Some even said, "You shouldn't have built so close to HOA land." HOA land. That phrase kept looping in my head like a curse. How could they redraw property lines without my consent? I pulled out my deed again. Original plat, signatures, county seal. It was all there. Yet somehow, men with machines had convinced everyone that they owned what was mine. As the night air cooled, I heard something metallic clank against wood. I stepped off the porch, flashlight trembling in my hand. There, staked at the edge of the clearing, was a brand new aluminum sign catching the moonlight. "Future site of Pine Ridge Cabins. HOA development project." My stomach turned. They weren't just clearing land, they were claiming it, in broad daylight, right under my nose. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't a mistake. It was a setup. Rick Harmon leaned against his gleaming black Ford truck like he owned the road, the lake, and the morning air itself. The reflection of the rising sun caught on his aviator sunglasses as he smirked. "Laura," he drawled, "you should be thanking me. This'll double your property value." I stood on my gravel driveway, fists trembling at my sides. Behind him, the hum of generators and nail guns echoed through the trees. My once quiet retreat now sounded like a construction zone. "You've got bulldozers tearing into my backyard, Rick," I said through clenched teeth. "And you think I should thank you?" He smiled wider, that politician's smile that never reached his eyes. Rick was the kind of man who believed charm could hide corruption. Mid-50s, salt and pepper hair slicked back, polo shirt tucked too tight over a belly built from HOA luncheons and beer. He exuded the kind of arrogance that came from years of getting his way. Now, he said, waving a manila folder like a magic trick. "No need to get emotional. Look here, this is the new Pine Ridge master plan. Approved and recorded. These boundaries are community managed now." He unfolded the papers on the hood of his truck. My name wasn't there. My lot number was, but shaded over in gray, labeled Recreational Development Zone. I felt my stomach drop. "That's not possible," I said. "I bought this property outright. The deed's in my name." Rick sighed like I was a child asking too many questions. "Paperwork gets messy. You know how counties are. But this," he tapped the map, "and this is the future. You should be proud." "Proud?" My hands balled into fists. "You forged this," I said. "I never signed any release, and the county never approved a boundary change." His smile didn't fade. He leaned closer, his cologne thick and expensive. "Laura, I'm trying to help you. Don't make this ugly. You'll lose. In court anyway. The HOA's got the county behind us. You can't fight progress." That word, progress, burned like acid. It was always the excuse men like him used when they wanted to steal something that didn't belong to them. I snatched the folder from his hand, scanning the fine print. The signatures looked blurred, like they'd been photocopied or altered. My name appeared faintly, but not in my handwriting. A forged signature. My jaw tightened. "I'm not signing anything," I said. "And if you or your workers step foot on my property again, I'll call the sheriff." Rick's smirk returned. "Go ahead," he said lightly. "The sheriff's a dues-paying member too." He slid back into his truck, revved the engine, and called out through the open window, "Relax, Laura. You'll thank me when your view's full of rental cabins instead of weeds." The truck roared away, kicking dust into my face. I stood there for a long time, heart pounding, staring at the papers in my hand. Something was terribly wrong. Deeper than just Rick's arrogance. The dates on the document didn't match county filings. The signatures looked inconsistent, and the plat map looked off, almost like someone had redrawn it by hand. I went inside, poured myself a glass of water that I didn't drink, and pulled out my deed. The original. The one I'd filed myself 2 years ago when I bought the land. The boundary was clear, 5 acres down to the waterline. The HOA's master plan didn't just overlap. It swallowed half my property. That night, I stayed up scrolling through the county's online assessor portal. The plat map on record was different from my paper copy. My jaw clenched as I realized the online version had been updated just 2 weeks ago. Legal nugget: never trust HOA maps. Always verify your property lines with the county assessor's office. Only recorded plats are legally binding. I printed every record I could find, highlighting discrepancies, timestamps, and revision dates. When the ink ran out, I drove to the county building first thing the next morning. And there, in a dusty file drawer labeled Community Development Projects, I found something that made my skin crawl. A revised HOA redevelopment plan, stamped with Rick Harmon's signature. But my lot number, it wasn't there anymore. It had been erased, as if I'd never existed. "Mrs. Bennett," the clerk whispered, glancing around the near-empty office. "Rick's been donating money to the zoning department." Her eyes darted toward the frosted glass door before leaning closer. "I shouldn't even be telling you this." The smell of toner and dust hung thick in the air, mingling with that faint metallic tang every government building seems to have. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering just enough to make me anxious. I gripped the counter with both hands, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just need a copy of my original plat map," I said. "The one from when I bought the property, before the HOA's changes." The clerk hesitated, glancing toward the back office. Officially, she said, her voice low, those are archived. Not for public release. Then she sighed, typing quietly. Unofficially, I don't like what's happening here either. Her printer whirred to life, spitting out sheet after sheet of thick paper. When she handed them to me, her hands trembled slightly. This, she whispered, is the recorded version from 2 years ago. County stamped, notarized, filed before the Pine Ridge development plan ever existed. Don't let anyone see I gave it to you. I took the papers like they were gold. The lines were crisp, clear, definitive. My 5-acre boundary, stretching clean down to the lake. I could see every coordinate, every marker, every inch that I owned. My lot was untouched. But when I compared it to the HOA's master plan Rick had shown me, my land had been absorbed, the borders smudged into common area. Someone had redrawn my property, not through mistake, but intention. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Who authorized this? I asked. The clerk's lips pressed together. Rick Harmon's name shows up on several adjustment forms, she said quietly. He's been donating software to our zoning department, the new mapping system. After that, a lot of community boundaries changed. Bribes, influence, manipulation. It all clicked together like puzzle pieces snapping into place. The reason no one questioned the cabins, the reason the sheriff hadn't responded, Rick owned them all, not with money, but with favors. The clerk glanced toward the door again. Mrs. Bennett, if you value your peace, make copies and keep them safe. And whatever you do, don't mention my name. Her voice was trembling now, and I realized this wasn't just fear for me, it was fear for herself. I thanked her softly and slipped the documents into my folder, heart pounding like a drum in my ears. As I walked out, the air outside felt thicker, heavier. Every step toward my car felt like walking out of a safe place into enemy territory. Back home, I spread both maps across my kitchen table, the real one and the forged one. The difference was unmistakable. The original county lines hugged the lake. The HOA's version sliced right through my property, claiming everything within 50 feet of the shoreline. The cabins under construction weren't just close to my boundary, they were deep inside it. I scanned every page, emailing copies to myself and to a flash drive I hid under my floorboard. Then I made physical copies and stored them in a waterproof folder inside my freezer. A trick I'd learned from an old police friend. Paper could burn, but ice could buy time. The sun had dipped below the trees by the time I finally sat on the porch, exhausted. The smell of fresh-cut pine still hung in the air, carried by the wind from the construction site. It wasn't just the sound of hammers anymore. I could hear trucks backing up, chains clinking, engines revving into the night. They weren't stopping. As I stared out across the lake, a movement caught my eye near the far edge of my property. I squinted through the dim light and saw new orange flags fluttering in the ground. Fresh survey stakes. They hadn't even waited 24 hours. The bastards were expanding. "Move your car, lady," a worker barked as a cement mixer lurched across my gravel driveway, blocking the only way out. The heavy machine hissed and grumbled like an animal, spitting gray sludge onto the ground. I could barely hear myself think over the chaos. Engines roaring, hammers clanging, men shouting orders. My peaceful corner of Pine Ridge had turned into a war zone. By 7 every morning, the trucks rolled in. Cement, lumber, generators. The air was thick with dust and diesel. I'd once woken to birdsong and the soft lap of lake water. Now, I woke to profanity and the crash of timber. My porch furniture was coated with grit, and every time I opened my windows, the smell of wet concrete and gasoline poured in. I tried talking to the workers again, but they just shrugged, muttering, "Talk to the HOA." That phrase, those 4 words, had become a weapon. Within days, the neighborhood started turning cold. My next-door neighbor, Sandra, used to wave every morning when she walked her golden retriever. Now she crossed the street instead. People I'd shared barbecues with wouldn't meet my eyes. Rick's poison had already spread. At first, I didn't understand why, until I checked my mailbox. 3 bright yellow envelopes were waiting, each stamped HOA Notice of Violation. One for unauthorized fence color, another for non-compliant landscaping, and the third, my favorite, for failure to maintain community harmony. I laughed, but it came out bitter. The HOA fines were piling up for crimes I hadn't even committed. It wasn't about money, it was punishment. A warning. Rick's way of saying, "Stay quiet or we'll bury you." That night, I sat on my porch, watching the construction lights burn through the darkness. My once silent lake shimmered under spotlights, the peaceful reflection shattered by noise. That's when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel behind me. "Still at it, huh?" It was Jim Carter, my friend, retired Army engineer and part-time land surveyor. He'd been helping me since the chaos began, and unlike the others, he wasn't afraid of Rick Harmon or his crew. "They're saying it's HOA land," I said quietly. "But I've got the county maps. My property line ends right past that big oak tree." Jim pulled a laser rangefinder from his truck. "Let's see who's lying." We trudged through the dust and debris until the machines quieted for lunch break. Jim paced, measured, and took readings. His eyes narrowed as he checked the digital map on his tablet. "Laura, these cabins aren't on the line," he said. "They're way over it. 43 feet inside your property, give or take." I felt my stomach twist. "You're sure?" "Dead sure," he said. "These fools built on your land, and they're not even trying to hide it." I stared at the skeletal frames of what would soon be luxury vacation cabins. Glass windows, porches, high-end decks, all sitting where my wildflowers used to grow. Every nail they drove felt like a personal insult. Jim crouched, pulling up a few orange survey stakes. "They shifted these markers to make it look like HOA property. It's deliberate, not an accident." My voice trembled. "Can I stop them?" He stood, dusting off his jeans. "You could, but that's what they want. They're hoping you'll get desperate, raise hell, and give them something to use against you." "Then what do I do?" Jim gave me a slow, knowing grin. "You wait. Let them finish. Let them pour every ounce of money and labor into your land. Then you hit them so hard they won't know what day it is." I blinked. "You mean, let them build?" He nodded. "Exactly. Let them build every cabin before you strike." The idea sounded insane, but the way Jim said it, calm, certain, made it feel like the only path forward. Legal Nugget and HOA cannot legally use member dues or community funds to finance private construction projects. Doing so is considered misappropriation of funds, a serious civil violation. As the sun dipped behind the lake, I watched the workers start up again, laughing and hammering like they were untouchable. My anger had cooled into something sharper. Patience. If they wanted to build their empire on my land, I'd let them. Brick by brick, nail by nail, until the whole thing belonged to me. Rick stood in my driveway, leaning on the hood of his truck with that same smug confidence he wore like cologne. "Glad you came to your senses, Laura," he said, flashing his politician's smile. "I knew you'd see reason eventually." I forced a small laugh, pretending to swallow my pride. "You were right, Rick. Maybe I overreacted," I said, keeping my voice steady. "If this helps the community, I'll step back." He grinned, completely buying it. "Smart woman. You'll thank me when this place is worth twice what you paid." He tipped his sunglasses and drove off, dust swirling in his wake. What he didn't know was that I wasn't surrendering, I was setting a trap. The moment he turned the corner, I pulled out my phone and started recording. Every hammer swing, every bulldozer pass, every beam they laid down. I logged everything: date, time, crew name, license plate, even the weather. My kitchen table became a command center. Notebooks stacked high, USB drives labeled by week. I'd learned in nursing that meticulous documentation saves lives. Now, it might save my land. Each morning, I'd walk the perimeter with my camera in a GPS tracker. I took photos of the cabins rising where my oak trees once stood. Sometimes I used my drone, flying it over the site while pretending to photograph the lake. The footage showed everything: the encroachment, the crews dumping materials on my lawn, even Rick's truck parked smack in the middle of my property. I hid the drone footage in 3 places: my email, a cloud drive, and a flash drive taped under my kitchen sink. Jim helped me measure each new structure as it went up. "They're digging themselves a hole," he'd mutter, jotting down measurements. "They just don't know it yet." The construction moved fast. Within weeks, the air was thick with sawdust and noise. From sunrise to sunset, the sound of hammers echoed across the lake, mingling with the buzz of generators and the rhythmic clatter of nail guns. The smell of freshly cut pine mixed with diesel fumes and lake air seeping into everything I owned. My clothes smelled like construction now, my once clear lake water clouded with mud. Neighbors stopped talking to me altogether. They believed Rick's story, that I'd sold part of my land to the HOA for the good of the community. No one asked me directly, but I saw the looks, the pity, the gossip. I let them believe it. Every rumor gave Rick more confidence, and the more confident he became, the sloppier his team got. One afternoon, I sat on my porch with a notepad, pretending to drink coffee while secretly noting the company names printed on the contractor trucks. I'd already called a few, pretending to be interested in future projects. That's how I learned Rick wasn't paying them directly from his company. He was paying them through HOA accounts, funded by member dues. That was my second smoking gun. Misuse of HOA funds, illegal, documented. Every night, I'd sit in the glow of my laptop, labeling files: Cabin 1 Foundation, GPS verified, boundary violation proof, worker admissions, audio. The more I gathered, the more focused I became. My anger had burned away, leaving behind something colder, sharper: patience. I wasn't shouting anymore. I wasn't begging anyone to listen. I was waiting for the perfect moment to make them choke on their own arrogance. Weeks passed, and the first cabin finally stood finished. A 2-story beauty with wraparound decks and floor-to-ceiling windows, built from polished cedar that gleamed under the sun. The crews were proud, taking pictures of their work, laughing, celebrating. But I couldn't take my eyes off one simple fact. Every nail, every plank, every board of that community project stood squarely inside my boundary lines. It wasn't just a cabin, it was my evidence, my leverage, my victory taking shape piece by piece. As the final hammer fell and the last worker stepped back to admire their masterpiece, I whispered to myself, "Perfect, let them build it all." Rick raised the scissors high, his grin stretched wide beneath a banner that read, "Welcome to Pine Ridge Cabins." The crowd applauded, phones flashing as if this were some kind of historic moment. I stood near the back, half hidden by a tree, my phone angled low, but recording every second. When the ribbon snapped, cheers erupted. I pressed record harder, capturing the sound of my stolen land being celebrated. The HOA had turned my lakefront into a circus. Balloons, barbecue grills, a rented stage, even a banner with the county seal. Though I doubted the county had officially blessed this theft. The local paper's van was parked near the edge, a reporter scribbling notes while Rick Harmon basked in attention like a movie star. He wore a light blue blazer and his usual smug smile, shaking hands and laughing loudly. The man had perfected the art of pretending to serve people while robbing them blind. "This," he boomed into a microphone, "is the future of Pine Ridge, a model for community growth and shared prosperity." Shared prosperity. The words made my blood boil. I zoomed in, making sure to catch every detail: the cabin's polished decks, the crowd's applause, Rick's every self-congratulatory phrase. He gestured toward the row of lakefront cabins, the ones standing on my land, and said, "Thanks to our dedicated HOA and generous partners, these units will generate thousands in rental revenue for our community." Perfect. He had just admitted, on camera, that the HOA was profiting off property that didn't belong to them. Evidence didn't get better than this. I turned slightly, catching the reporter from the Pine County Herald as she asked, "Mr. Harmon, who funded the construction?" Rick laughed, motioning to the crowd. "Our HOA did. Every homeowner contributed. We're building this for the good of all residents. A legacy project." Behind him, I caught sight of one of the workers, a man I'd seen before, the one who'd told me to talk to the HOA. He gave me a faint nod, almost apologetic. Maybe he knew, maybe everyone knew, but money and fear keep people quiet. The smell of grilled meat and pine smoke filled the air. Children ran across what used to be my garden, their laughter clashing with the sound of the generator humming near the stage. Every sight, every sound cut deeper, but I stayed still, my expression blank, my phone recording steady. Rick's voice rose again, his ego on full display. "The first 5 cabins are just the beginning. Pine Ridge is expanding, and our next phase will make this community the crown jewel of the county." The crowd applauded wildly, not knowing they were cheering for theft. My heart hammered as I kept filming. Legal nugget. In most states, knowingly building on another person's land is considered willful trespass, a serious civil violation. The landowner can claim triple damages for intentional encroachment. That was exactly what Rick had done, and I had every piece of proof I needed. When the ribbon cutting ended, Rick stepped down to mingle. Cameras followed him as he posed with board members, laughing like a man who believed he'd won. I watched from a distance, zooming in on his face, the arrogance carved into every smile. He thought I was beaten. He thought silence meant surrender, but silence was just my strategy. As the event wrapped up, I started walking back toward my cabin, still, recording the distant crowd. That's when I heard Rick's voice echo over the loudspeaker one last time. "And now," he said, "I'm proud to announce Phase 2. Luxury lake villas, extending down to the East Ridge, right up to Mrs. Bennett's old cabin." Laughter rolled through the audience. People clapped. Some even looked my way. My throat went dry. My porch, my last bit of peace, was next on his list. I stopped recording and slipped the phone into my pocket. The game had changed. Rick wasn't just taking my land anymore. He was coming for my home. "You've got them by the throat," Attorney Mark Alvarez said, flipping through the stack of photos spread across his dashboard. The rain outside drummed against the truck's metal roof, steady and heavy, like a metronome counting down to war. We were parked behind the old diner near the highway, the only place far enough from Pine Ridge where we could talk without curious eyes or HOA ears. Mark was in his late 40s, ex-military, with calm gray eyes and a face that didn't flinch easily. He'd handled boundary disputes before, but when I told him what Rick Harmon and the HOA had done, he'd just shaken his head slowly. "This isn't a mistake," he'd said. "This is organized fraud." He slid one of my photos closer to him. A drone shot of Cabin 3, standing deep within my boundary lines. "Look at that," he said. "They didn't just encroach, they built. These aren't sheds, Laura. These are income properties. You're sitting on a gold mine of evidence." I nodded, trying to stay composed, though my nerves were buzzing. "So what do I do?" Mark leaned back, tapping a pen against his knee. "You don't do anything. Not yet. Let them finish. Every cabin they complete increases the damages. You interrupt them now, they'll claim it was a boundary confusion. You let them finish, and we can prove intent. Intent means triple damages and full property rights under fixture law." I stared out the window. Rain traced crooked lines down the glass, blurring the shape of the trees. "You're saying I just watch them build?" He nodded. "Exactly. Patience is your weapon now. You've done everything right so far. Photos, timestamps, recordings. Keep collecting, but no confrontation, no warning. We'll file once the project's complete." His calm voice steadied me. For the first time in months, I felt like someone believed me, and more than that, someone had a plan. Mark flipped through the folder again. "We'll prepare a notice of intent to sue, just to lock the clock. I won't serve it yet, The second they finished their grand project, we hit them with it. Trespass, misappropriation, fraud, and willful encroachment. He smiled faintly. And once the court sees this evidence, they'll hand you not just your land, but every cabin sitting on it. The thought sent a strange shiver through me. Half disbelief, half satisfaction. I imagined Rick's face when he realized that every luxury cabin he'd built now legally belonged to me. We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the rain. The truck smelled faintly of wet leather and coffee. Mark reached into his glove compartment and handed me a small flash drive. "Back up," he said. "Every document, every plat map, every note you've given me, scanned and encrypted. Keep it somewhere safe." I took it carefully. "Thank you, Mark. I felt so alone in this." He smiled, a quiet kind of reassurance. "You're not alone anymore. Just stay calm. The louder they get, the more desperate they are." When the rain slowed, I drove home through winding, wet roads, windshield wipers keeping time with my heartbeat. For the first time since the bulldozers came, I felt a sense of control again. The fear hadn't left, but now it had direction. That night, I sat at my table, organizing files and labeling new evidence folders. Cabin 4 foundation, Phase 2 expansion footage, community event audio. I had everything Mark needed, and more coming every day. But just as I was closing my laptop, headlights swept across my living room wall. A vehicle stopped outside. I stepped to the window and saw Rick's black truck idling at the end of my driveway. My pulse quickened. He didn't get out. Instead, his passenger leaned out and slid a white envelope into my mailbox before the truck roared off into the darkness. I waited until the taillights disappeared before I went to get it. The envelope was slick with rain, stamped with the HOA seal. Inside, one line was printed in bold: "Notice of membership termination, effective immediately." I read it twice, my jaw tightening. Rick had just declared war. My mailbox was gone, replaced with a bright orange HOA violation notice nailed to my fence. The wind tugged at the paper, making it flap like a warning flag. I stood there barefoot in the cold morning dew, staring at the nail marks where my mailbox used to be. The notice listed 5 offenses: improper yard maintenance, non-compliant paint color, hostile communication, unauthorized signage, and, my favorite, failure to cooperate with community leadership. Rick Harmon had gone from smug to ruthless. The harassment started slow, like an infection spreading. First came the fines. Each week, a new envelope appeared under my door. $150 here, $300 there, all for imaginary infractions. Then came the threats of lien placement. They wanted to drown me in paperwork and fear. Soon after, the neighbors changed. People I'd known for years, folks I'd shared Thanksgiving leftovers with, wouldn't even wave anymore. They crossed the street when I stepped outside. Some whispered when they saw me. The rumor was I'd sued the HOA and was trying to bankrupt the community. Rick had turned me into a villain. I started noticing strange things: trash cans tipped over, deep tire ruts carved into my grass. One morning, my porch lights were smashed. Glass glittered across the steps like frost. Another night, I woke to the sound of footsteps crunching gravel outside my window. When I flipped on the porch light, there was no one there. Just the faint sound of an engine fading into the distance. The fear was real, but so was my resolve. I refused to react. Every notice, every act of vandalism, every whisper, I documented it all. Photos, dates, timestamps, descriptions. I called the sheriff each time, even when I knew the report would be inconclusive. I wanted a trail, one that would expose the HOA's campaign of harassment. My once tranquil home had turned into a fortress of evidence. Motion sensors, cameras, floodlights. I installed them all. The click of recording devices became part of my nightly routine. Some nights I barely slept, listening to the hum of electronics and the occasional pop of breaking twigs outside. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was strategy. I was collecting ammunition. I even started keeping a small notebook labeled HOA retaliation log. Every time I received a notice or found something damaged, I wrote down the time, the weather, and any suspicious sounds. My handwriting had changed. No longer gentle and rounded, but sharp and fast, like my nerve. Legal nugget. If a homeowner faces ongoing intimidation or harassment from HOA officials, they can file for a civil harassment injunction or restraining order. Harassment by board members is a violation of fiduciary duty and can carry personal liability. It was my lifeline, knowing the law still had some sharp edges left for people like me. One afternoon, I went to check my security footage and noticed something chilling. The same white pickup truck had driven past my house 6 times in 1 hour. Each time, it slowed near my property, then sped off. The license plate matched a contractor Rick often used, one who'd built the first cabin. By then, the cabins were nearly finished. Tourists were already booking stays online. Rick was publicly bragging about record HOA profits. It was surreal, watching him grow bolder, louder, more confident, while my home became a silent battleground. The nights grew colder, and so did the looks I got in town. People whispered when I bought groceries, when I got gas. Rick had painted me as the enemy of Pine Ridge. But that's the thing about lies. They rot from the inside out. Late one night, I heard a sound that froze me in place. The steady hum of machinery. Not far away this time, but close. I threw on a coat and stepped outside. Headlights illuminated the edge of my property. A small construction crew was unloading equipment, right beside my front steps. My hands trembled, not with fear, but fury. They were clearing ground for Phase 2, right at my doorstep. I didn't stop them. Not yet. I just whispered into the cold night air, "Go ahead, Rick. Dig your own grave." "Once we file this," Mark said, sliding a thick stack of papers across my kitchen table, "there's no turning back." The sound of the printer still echoed in my ears, that steady mechanical hum that had filled the room for hours. Page after page, ink on paper, every word, every exhibit, every photo was another bullet loaded into the chamber. My house smelled faintly of toner and coffee. The table between us looked like a war map. Outside, the lake was quiet again, eerily calm. The cabins, 5 of them now fully built, stood across my property, like smug little monuments to Rick Harmon's greed. They were being rented out already. I'd seen the online listings: Pine Ridge luxury cabins, lakefront bliss. The photos made me sick. Families smiling on my land, kids running across what used to be my garden. They had no idea they were standing in stolen soil, but their laughter didn't haunt me anymore. Not the way it used to. Now every smiling tourist photo was evidence. Every rental review, every receipt, every dollar earned, another nail in Rick's coffin. Mark spread out the documents. Trespass, fraud, misuse of HOA funds, willful encroachment. We're hitting every charge we can. He spoke with calm precision, but his eyes had that glint. The kind that comes from knowing justice is finally within reach. "You've done the hard part, Laura," he said. "You waited. You documented. You gave them enough rope to hang themselves." I ran my fingers over the lawsuit's cover page. My name sat right there in bold: Plaintiff, Laura Bennett. Beneath it, Defendant, Richard Harmon, Pine Ridge Homeowners Association, and affiliated members. A chill ran through me. It felt monumental, terrifying, but empowering too. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Rick has the county, the board, half the town in his pocket." Mark smiled faintly. "You've got something better. The truth, and proof to back it." He tapped the evidence binder beside him. "That's what wins cases." He wasn't wrong. I had spent weeks compiling everything: gigabytes of video, hours of drone footage, screenshots of HOA payments funneled into development accounts, even invoices showing Rick's personal signature on construction materials. I had photos of his ribbon cutting, press quotes, public records of him claiming HOA ownership. I even had drone footage showing the cabin's GPS coordinates, clearly on my property line. Every beam, every nail, every foundation poured in the wrong place. It wasn't just a paper case anymore. It was a mountain of truth too heavy for even Rick to bulldoze. Sensory detail, the rhythmic hum of the printer, the soft click of my pen as I signed affidavit after affidavit, the faint smell of rain drifting in from the open window. My heartbeat sinking with the quiet shuffle of paper as we built the case brick by brick. Once we file this, Mark repeated, his voice steady, it becomes public record. The county, the press, the HOA board, everyone will see it. Rick won't be able to hide. I nodded, feeling both the weight and relief of that truth. Then file it, I said softly. Let's end this. Mark smiled, a flicker of pride in his eyes. You've got more grit than most people I know. He gathered the papers carefully into a briefcase, snapping the latches shut with a metallic click that sounded like a gun being cocked. I'll file first thing tomorrow. Be ready for noise once this hits. After he left, I sat, alone at the table. The house was quiet, too quiet. For months I'd lived with the sound of construction. Now silence felt foreign, but beneath that silence, something pulsed. Anticipation, fear, power. The cabin's light shimmered across the lake like reflections of everything I'd lost, and everything I was about to take back. Just as I was about to turn off the porch light, headlights flashed in my driveway. A white sheriff's SUV rolled up, tires crunching on the gravel. My heart jumped into my throat. Had Rick already filed something against me? Was this his retaliation again? The deputy stepped out, a folded document in hand. I braced myself as he approached. Evening, ma'am, he said, handing me the envelope. You've been named in a civil matter. My stomach twisted as I opened it, until I saw the name at the top. Defendant, Richard Harmon. I looked up at the deputy. So this is for him? He nodded. Yes, ma'am. He's being served first thing in the morning. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. The calm wasn't silence anymore. It was the stillness right before the storm breaks. The judge's voice cut through the silence. Mr. Harmon, do you have a valid building permit? The entire courtroom went still. Even the hum of the ceiling fans seemed to pause. Rick Harmon sat at the defense table, face flushed, his usual confidence gone. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I watched from the plaintiff's side, my hands clasped in my lap. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt calm. The courtroom was full. Neighbors, reporters, even a few HOA board members who suddenly wanted to distance themselves from Rick. The air smelled faintly of coffee and old wood, that familiar courthouse scent that carried both fear and finality. Rick's lawyer cleared his throat. Your Honor, we're still gathering certain documentation. The judge cut him off sharply. You've had 3 continuances, counselor. Either your client has the permits, or he doesn't. Rick's face turned a deeper shade of red. He shifted in his chair, papers trembling in his hand. We believed the HOA's master plan. Believed? The judge leaned forward. Mr. Harmon, you oversaw the construction of 5 full-sized cabins, rented to the public, on land that your HOA does not own. Belief is not a defense. The press scribbled frantically. Cameras clicked from the back row. When it was my turn to testify, I rose slowly, my knees steady beneath me. I walked to the witness stand and took the oath. Mark Alvarez gave me a reassuring nod. Mrs. Bennett, the judge began, please present your evidence. I opened the binder we'd prepared, months of work distilled into a single narrative. Your Honor, I said, these are my original county plats, filed and recorded 2 years before the HOA's development plan. Here are the updated maps showing illegal boundary changes. These, I held up printed screenshots, are public rental listings for cabins built entirely within my property line. Gasps rippled through the audience. I continued, here is drone footage, time-stamped, showing construction crews on my land. And these, I slid photos across, show the exact GPS coordinates proving the structures fall 43 feet inside my legal boundary. The judge flipped through the pages, his expression darkening. Impressive record-keeping, Mrs. Bennett. I looked straight at Rick. I was a nurse for 20 years. I said quietly. Documentation saves lives. Turns out it saves land too. A few people chuckled softly. Rick's lawyer shot me a glare, but even he looked defeated. Then Mark presented the financial records. Your Honor, he said, we also have evidence that Mr. Harmon funded this project using HOA member dues, a clear case of misappropriation. The courtroom buzzed louder now. Rick's lawyer leaned over to him, whispering furiously. Rick shook his head, sweating, until the lawyer finally stood and addressed the court. Your Honor, at this time, the defense is withdrawing from representation. The judge raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? I cannot ethically continue to represent my client, the attorney said stiffly, gathering his briefcase. I've just been informed certain documents were falsified. The judge looked at Rick with a kind of cold pity. Mr. Harmon, you've managed to turn a neighborhood association into a criminal enterprise. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done? Rick slumped in his seat, staring at the table. The judge shuffled the papers in front of him, then looked up. Mrs. Bennett, under Georgia property fixture law, any structure permanently built on private land becomes the legal property of the landowner, regardless of who paid for it. Legal nugget under fixture law, anything built on your land becomes your property, even if someone else built it illegally. The gavel struck once. Effective immediately, all 5 cabins and the land they occupy are awarded to the plaintiff, Laura Bennett. Additionally, restitution for trespass and misuse of funds will be determined in a separate hearing. The sound that followed was pure chaos. Reporters leaping up, neighbors gasping, cameras flashing. I sat frozen, barely breathing, as the words sank in. The cabins are mine. Rick stood abruptly, his face pale. Flashbulbs exploded around him as he stumbled toward the exit, reporters shouting questions. Mr. Harmon, did you forge the maps? Did you steal HOA funds? He didn't answer. He just pushed through the crowd, shoulders hunched, his empire crumbling behind him. Mark leaned close and whispered, You just made history, Laura. As I stepped outside, the courthouse doors opened to bright sunlight and a wall of cameras. For the first time, I didn't shy away. I looked straight into the lenses and said, He built on my land. I just took it back. HOA president charged with fraud and theft. The headline flashed across my TV screen, Rick Harmon's mugshot staring back at me. The same smug grin he once wore at HOA meetings was gone, replaced with hollow eyes and a booking number across his chest. I set my coffee down slowly, letting the moment sink in. It was over. The news anchor's voice was calm, professional, but every word felt like justice. Authorities confirmed that former Pine Ridge HOA President Richard Harmon was taken into custody this morning on charges of fraud, misappropriation of funds, and falsifying county documents. I leaned back on my couch, the afternoon sun spilling across the floorboards. The lake shimmered outside my window, peaceful again for the first time in months. After the verdict, everything had moved fast. County auditors swept through the HOA's records like wildfire. What they found was worse than anyone expected. Years of skimming, bribes to local officials, fake invoices, and embezzled member dues funneled into Rick's private projects. He'd built his empire not on management, but on theft. Within weeks, Pine Ridge Homeowners Association was dissolved. The board resigned in disgrace, their bank accounts frozen. The state attorney's office launched a full investigation into Rick's dealings with county zoning officials, including those donations that had greased the land maps. I received official notice from the court 2 weeks later. Every cabin, every inch of the land they'd built on, was now legally mine. The deed was updated, stamped, and signed in my name. I ran my fingers across the embossed seal, barely believing it. My property was whole again. But ownership came with choices. I decided to sell 4 of the 5 cabins, enough to cover legal fees and still leave me with more than I'd ever dreamed of. The 5th cabin, the one closest to the lake, I kept for myself. It was poetic in a way. Their monument to greed turned into my sanctuary. The day I moved into it, the air felt different, lighter, cleaner. I left the windows open so the scent of pine and lake water could drift through the rooms. The sound of the wind against the water was soft, steady, like the place was exhaling after holding its breath too long. Sometimes I'd sit on the deck at sunset, watching the light fade over the water, and think about everything that had happened. The fear, the humiliation, the sleepless nights. It had all built toward this moment of peace. Freedom has a sound, and for me, it was the quiet rush of lake wind through the trees. Neighbors began to warm up again after Rick's arrest. Some even came by with apologies, admitting they'd believed his lies. I didn't hold it against them. Rick had manipulated everyone. The board, the county, the entire community. But one visit, in particular, stayed with me. A young family pulled into my driveway one morning. A man, his wife, and their little girl. They were moving into one of the cabins I'd sold. The father shook my hand, smiling awkwardly. "You must be Mrs. Bennett," he said. "We just wanted to thank you. We heard what you did. You saved this place from people like him." The wife nodded, her eyes soft. "It's beautiful here. Peaceful. You made that possible." I looked out toward the lake where the cabins stood gleaming in the morning sun, no longer symbols of corruption, but of justice reclaimed. "Just promise me one thing," I said gently. "Never let anyone tell you your home doesn't belong to you." The man smiled. "After what you did, I don't think anyone around here will forget that." As they drove away, the wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of their laughter across the water. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me, the sound of a place reborn. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was quiet, like the wind, steady and unyielding. And in that silence I finally felt free. As sunrise hit the water, I whispered, "You built on my land, Rick. Now I own yours." The lake shimmered gold beneath the light, each ripple catching fire for a moment before fading back to calm. It felt poetic, that the same lake where my nightmare began was now the quiet witness to my victory. The air smelled of pine and morning dew. Freedom had its own scent, and I was finally breathing it in. It had been months since the trial ended, but the story still echoed through Pine Ridge like folklore. At first I wanted to move on quietly, to disappear into my peace. But peace, I learned, isn't just the absence of noise, it's what you build after surviving it. So when the town council invited me to speak at the new community meeting, I said yes. The old HOA hall had been converted into a public space. Open walls, fresh paint, and a new sign that read Pine Ridge Lakeside Association, resident-owned, resident-run. Fitting, I thought, walking in. The crowd turned as I stepped up to the microphone, murmurs spreading through the room. Faces I hadn't seen in months, neighbors who'd once turned away from me, now smiled, clapped, some even stood. I cleared my throat, heart pounding. "Most of you know what happened," I began, voice steady. "You saw the cabins go up. You heard the rumors, and maybe some of you believed them." I paused, scanning the room. "But I'm not here to talk about the past. I'm here to talk about what we do next." You could have heard a pin drop. "I learned something through all this," I continued. "That power, especially HOA power, depends on fear. They count on silence. They count on people assuming they're right just because they sound official. But you have more rights than you think. You just have to know where to look for them." People nodded. Someone whispered, "That's true," under their breath. "So here's my advice," I said, raising the folder I'd brought. "Always verify your deeds at the county office. Always keep paper copies. And if someone tells you your land isn't yours anymore, don't argue. Document. Record. Prove it. Patience and evidence will do more damage to corruption than shouting ever will." Applause broke out. Hesitant at first, then louder, stronger, filling the hall. Afterward, people came up to me, homeowners, retirees, young couples just buying their first properties, all with the same look in their eyes, the look of people who finally understood they could fight back. One older man said, "You gave this place its spine back." A woman whispered, "You made us believe in the law again." I smiled, humbled. I didn't beat them because I was brave, I said. I beat them because I was patient. That night, I returned to the lake, sitting on the porch of my cabin as the sun melted into the water. The world was quiet again. No bulldozers, no shouting, just the rustle of wind through trees and the distant call of loons on the lake. The same sounds I'd fallen in love with the day I bought this land. I thought of Rick, somewhere far from here now, awaiting sentencing. For all his power, his money, his threats, he'd fallen to something simple. Truth. Moral takeaway: corruption falls hardest when patience meets proof. I stood and looked across the lake, the cabins reflecting orange in the last light of dusk. They were mine now, symbols of everything I'd endured and everything I'd reclaimed. I smiled and spoke softly, almost like a narrator closing a story. What would you do if an HOA built on your land? Would you let them finish first? The wind carried the words across the lake, whispering them back to me. Then, as the night settled in, I turned toward the camera on my porch. My next recording ready to begin. Next story, I said quietly. The HOA that forged a veteran's signature to steal his home.